So I wanted to do my second part in the series for the institutionalization of religion. The last one I only got through of one of Thomas O'Day's 5 dilemmas of institutionalization. So I wanted to try to get through 2, 3, and 4 in this video. I'm going to save 5 for its own video, and you'll see why when I get to that one because of its importance. But anyway, the second dilemma of institutionalization deals with symbolism. When put in a nutshell, it's basically objectification versus alienation. Religion as a whole uses symbols and social observances to create meaning to that original religious experience that we talked about last time. So basically, it's the act of making things sacred, right? Sacred action, sacred space, sacred objects, sacred time, sacred language. In the idea of making things sacred, we go through social observances like rituals. Here's a couple examples of some social observances that you might recognize. The idea of the sacred feast is one that you find in a lot of different religions. There's times of either fasting or feast in a lot of different religions. First example I want to bring up, obviously, if you've been Christian at any time in your life, you've probably experienced communion or the Eucharist. And that would be ingesting wine and bread as symbolic flesh and blood to bring yourself closer to that, experience of Jesus, sacrificing his flesh and blood for you. Second thing, coming up here, we've got Samhain, and a lot of people are going to be celebrating the Dumb Supper, which is an act of inviting your ancestors that have passed on, inviting them back to feast with you. A lot of people believe in the idea of divine ancestors in their pagan faiths, and that's great. For a lot of pagans, they believe that this time of year is when the veil between worlds becomes thinnest, and that spiritual idea, that spiritual experience, is then observed with the Dumb Supper. Another thing I want to talk about when it comes to ritual is sacred sexuality. This is something that's very pagan, of course. There are some religions, of course, that have different sacred sexuality rites and stuff like that. For the most part, though, this is a pagan thing. The Great Rite, something we'll find in a lot of Wiccan covens and also traditional witchcraft covens, is when two persons within the coven reenact the creation of life of the Lord and Lady through sexual intercourse or symbolic sexual intercourse. Originally, it was actual sexual intercourse within the religious space, sacred space. But a lot of covens aren't really quite comfortable with the idea of sexual intercourse as part of spirituality, and therefore they symbolize the sexual intercourse with the chalice and the athame. The dilemma comes when instituting these symbols as integral parts of religion, but doing so without the symbols and the rituals losing their meaning. Basically, the drawback is that if you do certain things too much or don't explain the meaning behind them, they become routine or foreign from the religious experience. Mystic Blue made a video, I think today or recently, where she talked about sitting in church and it being so boring and stuff like that. And the whole idea of sitting in church and going to that worship service used to be a ritual that meant something, and to a lot of people, it lost its meaning. They didn't feel connected to the religious community at that service. It was too routine. The third dilemma is the dilemma of administrative order. This deals with something that O'Day calls elaboration versus alienation. Now, elaboration comes when religion experiences growth. When a religion, becomes bigger, a lot of times there are things that are done that become administrative and not necessarily religious aspects of the religion. I'll give you a couple of examples. Nowadays, almost every church has a communications division where there's people doing printing, graphics, websites, phone answering, reception type things. People who do fundraising and things of that sort. All of these things are not necessarily religious. And the rub is that, you have these types of things that are needed for growth and you want to elaborate your religion. But at the same time, how do you do that without alienating people from the religion if you, for example, empower people who have different religious ideas? For example, if you have a small church and you don't have anybody there who's a graphic designer, it might mean you have to hire somebody from outside to fill that position. When that happens, you then introduce foreign person into your religious organization. And for some religions, they would consider that to be quite threatening. For if you happen to get people who are inside the religious organization to fill those positions, there's still problems because you're preoccupying religious people with irreligious activities, and therefore could alienate them from the people who have more spiritual positions in the faith. For example, lay ministers, Sunday school teachers, and so forth and so on. The fourth dilemma is the dilemma of delimitation. And basically, what that focuses on is, concrete definition versus substitution of the letter for the spirit. All religions want to protect their spiritual religious rights, but if you go too far with this, it can lead to fundamentalism. Rigid definitions of what the religion is and adherents are, and it may reduce the religious message or the spirit behind the message. It can lead to dogmatic practice, which leads to exclusion of all ideas that are non-dogmatic, and non-established practices may be considered to be foreign or not allowed. And in some instances, these things may be considered to be anti-religious. So anything that's not part or inside the religion could be considered to be anti-religious or somewhat harmful. You've seen this lately with, people who automatically assume that things that talk about witchcraft, for example, are anti-Christian. Because it's not part of their religious idea, it automatically becomes outside of their religious idea and therefore wrong or evil or bad. Now, spirit rather than letter is exactly opposite the problem. It leads to a do-what-you-will feel and dilutes the religious connection of the believers. It can confuse believers as to, practices and symbolism, and therefore kind of dilute the group to where there's really not much connection to each other. I'm going to give you some examples of both, right? The first one, when we talk about fundamentalism, obviously one of the best examples is conservative Christianity. It focuses on fundamentalist Bible teachings, which can get so narrow that they end up focusing on things that are not the original message, but all these fine details and fine interpretations of the text in such a way that they lose the actual spirit of the message, which was Jesus Christ. In Wicca, for example, which is spirit rather than letter, you do get this do-what-you-will attitude in a lot of religious organizations. And it has kind of diluted the religious belief and practice, where if someone says to you, what is Wicca, it's kind of hard to explain at this point. And so they have become diluted in that aspect. Alright, so I've kind of gone through all of this, and I wanted to tell you that the last one is going to be in its own video. So you can look for that one on its own. And blessed be, guys.